Hi, so in this video I want to look at some different time series just to get a feel for what kinds of graphs we'll see when we talk about time series and what they look like. So here's some terms that people use when they talk about time series. They talk about whether there's a trend versus whether it's stationary. And stationary means it's centered at a certain height. And we'll see that. So it sort of always stays right level at some height for stationary versus trend. Trend will be that the graph either goes upwards, and we can see it kind of going upwards from left to right, so increasing from left to right, or it might be decreasing from left to right. So that's trend. Variability is going to be if the time series is very smooth as it goes, or do we see it kind of very jagged? Does it go up and down and up and down? So that could be either very smooth or it might be very noisy as it develops. And finally, the graph or the time series might have seasonality, and that's the same pattern each year or each month or each day, something that repeats on a regular basis based on your time periods. It's called seasonality. So the graph might be seasonal if it has that, but if it doesn't have that kind of pattern, we'll call it non-seasonal. So I want to use these terms and look at some graphs and just see if I can understand these terms in terms of some examples. So I'm going to go over to this next page here. And here's 8 examples of time series. And these might all be some kind of demand for a product, say. So let's take a look at these. Remember, the terms we used were trend or stationary, and then noisy or smooth, and then seasonal or non-seasonal. So first I want to look for stationary ones. Which graphs are stationary? That means they're kind of centered about the same height. This one seems to be increasing, so I don't think it's stationary. This one, yes, it looks like it is stationary. It's always kind of at the same height, or sort of kind of oscillates a little bit about the same height. Not very much, though. Let's see if we can find another stationary one. This one is decreasing. This one is increasing. This one's increasing. This one might actually be stationary. It looks like it's sort of at the same height. It goes back and forth on either side of that height, but the height looks like it's not really changing here. It doesn't really look like it's going upwards like this one, increasing. And it doesn't look like it's decreasing like that one as well, too. So I'm going to say this one is stationary as well. This one is also stationary. It's always sort of centered at this height, even though it kind of goes up and down and up and down. It's certainly not increasing, and it's certainly not decreasing. And then this one over here is a little strange. It starts off sort of smoother and then gets more noisy, but it looks stationary as well, too. It's sort of not a trend. There's not an upward trend or a downward trend there. Okay, so for stationary, I think I got this one. Let's see what else. I'm going to add this one. This one we said was stationary. This one too. And the other 3 are definitely not stationary. So this one over here, this one has a trend, and it's increasing. This one also has a trend, and it's increasing. This one has a trend, and it's decreasing. So this one is decreasing. And this one over here has got some kind of a trend, and it's increasing again, right? Okay, so we labeled everything as to whether it's stationary or it has a trend. And if it does have a trend, we labeled what kind it is. Okay, so let's go back and look at our terms. What's some of the other terms? Smooth versus noisy, and seasonal versus non-seasonal. So let's look for that stuff. Okay, so back over here, smooth would mean that it doesn't really oscillate around, and I don't see it kind of going up and down. So smooth, I'm going to say this one is smooth, right? Smooth. Oops. Let's see, I want 10. Okay, so that one's smooth. Let's find some other ones that are smooth. This one up here I think is smooth as well too. It's pretty smooth. It certainly doesn't look like this one, right? I'm going to call this one noisy down here. So noisy. Okay, and I'll come back and fix those in a minute. Noisy. Let's see, this one is smooth, this one is smooth, this one's pretty smooth as well. Okay. This one actually does look smooth as well in a way, because the sort of oscillations here look like they are seasonality. So I'll leave that for now and come back to it in a minute. This one looks very smooth sort of here, but then it's sort of noisy out here. I'm going to call it noisy overall. So that's noisy out there. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to fix those. Okay, let's see, what else do we have? This one, it's not as regular as this one. This one has some regularity to it. It's sort of the same shape each time, even though it kind of has trend going uphill. It's very kind of regular in its pattern, right? So I'm going to call this one smooth. And this one over here looks a little bit noisier, right? This one is kind of a regular pattern as well. It repeats every four, every four, but it's a little bit noisy in the way that it repeats. So in particular, this is seasonality, seasonal. That one has seasonality, as well as this one down here has seasonality. Right, it sort of repeats. This one repeats. Even though it does have trend as well too. I can see that if I take the trend out, it would have that sort of regular repeating pattern. So this one's seasonal, this one's seasonal. This one, I don't see any kind of regular repeating pattern. I would say this one is kind of noisy as well. So it's not smooth in the way this one is, not smooth in the way this one is. Okay, so noisy. And then finally, the last thing I want to look at is seasonality. Okay, so I think we identified this one has seasonality, and this one has seasonality. The rest of them are non-seasonal. So I don't see it there, I don't see it here, nor here, and not here, and here. Okay, so I think we labeled them all. This one is sort of smooth. Oops, this one's also non-seasonal. This one's sort of smooth and has trend, it's decreasing. This one's smooth, it has seasonality, it also has trend as well. This one's pretty smooth, a little bit of variation there. So it's stationary and it's non-seasonal. This one over here is has a trend, it's increasing, it's non-seasonal, and it is a bit noisy as well too. This one, very smooth, it's just a straight line, trend increasing, and it's non-seasonal. This one has seasonality, but the seasonality is not as regular as this example over here. So that's why I called this one noisy. It's a little bit more variation in the pattern, even though I do see it seasonality according to repeat every four, and it is also stationary. This one's always kind of centered around the same height. This one up here was not stationary, and it had a trend. Finally, this one right here is stationary, it's noisy, and it's non-seasonal. These are often the most difficult kinds of time series to forecast because they are just kind of all over the place in terms of the ups and downs about the center value that if they're stationary. So at any rate, these are some examples of different series. This one's very interesting too. Starts off sort of smooth and gets kind of gradually more noisy. So